Imagine raising a child like a servant in your own home, feeding her scraps, making her clean the very plates you eat from, reminding her every single day that she is lucky you even let her stay. All while the fortune, the empire, the legacy she was born to inherit silently belonged to her. This is not fiction. This is the story of Lily Voss. They raised her like a servant, not knowing she owned everything. It began on a rain-lashed highway many years ago, on a night the heavens themselves seemed determined to rewrite one family's destiny. The storm came without mercy. Rain hammered the windshield in violent, blinding sheets, turning the winding road into a treacherous river of shadows. 5-year-old Lily Voss sat in the back seat, her small body pressed against the seatbelt, tiny hands desperately clutching her mother's coat as if sheer willpower could hold the world together. "Mommy," she whispered, voice shaking with fear. Her mother turned, eyes soft with love but heavy with terror. "It's okay, my darling," she said, reaching back to gently brush wet strands of hair from Lily's forehead. "Mommy's got you. I've always got you." But fate had already decided otherwise. The tires lost their grip. The car spun out of control. Metal screamed in agony as it twisted and flipped. Glass exploded into the night like a storm of shattered stars. In those final chaotic seconds before darkness claimed them, Lily's mother pulled her daughter close with every last ounce of strength. She pressed her lips to Lily's ear and breathed the words that would become the girl's lifelong light in the darkness. "No matter what happens, you belong somewhere bigger than this moment." Then, silence. Darkness swallowed everything. When the little girl woke up in a hospital days later, both her parents were gone. The crash had taken them in one merciless instant. And 5-year-old Lily Voss, orphaned, broken, alone, was handed over like forgotten luggage to the only remaining family she had left, her uncle Victor Voss and his wife Meredith. They did not welcome her with open arms. They did not see a grieving niece who needed love and protection. They saw an inconvenience, a burden, a living, breathing reminder of the fortune that should have been theirs, now suddenly standing in their grand estate, small and unwanted. From the very first day, they made their position crystal clear. The grand Voss estate echoed with laughter that was never meant for Lily. Warmth never touched her skin. Belonging remained a distant dream she was never allowed to reach. Every single morning, long before the sun rose, the girl who should have been the young mistress of the house was instead awakened to serve. "Careful with that tray," Meredith would snap the moment Lily entered the dining room, her voice dripping with disdain. "That china is worth more than you'll ever be worth in your entire life. Don't you dare chip it." Lily, only a child at first and later a quiet teenager, would lower her eyes and answer softly, "Yes." "Ma'am?" At the head of the polished mahogany table sat Victor Voss, her uncle, reading his financial reports with the smug entitlement of a man who believed everything in front of him, including the girl serving breakfast, rightfully belonged to him. Serena, their daughter and Lily's cousin, barely looked up from her phone. Did she make eggs again? God, can't she do anything right? It's like having a useless maid who thinks she's family. Lily placed the plate gently in front of her cousin. They're prepared exactly the way you prefer them. Serena scoffed loudly. You don't get to know what I prefer. You just do what you're told. That's all you're good for. Lily never answered back. She never defended herself. She simply stepped back, hands folded, the perfect image of silent obedience. But inside, a quiet fire burned. Because every single day they reminded her of her place. Victor would lean back in his chair and say with that bitter smile, "You should be grateful we even kept you, Lily." Most people would have turned an orphan away without a second thought. We gave you a roof. We gave you purpose. Remember that. Meredith, ever the architect of appearances, would add with her porcelain smile that never reached her eyes, "Exactly. We didn't have to do this, you know. Some families would have sent you to foster care. But we took you in, so be thankful and stay in your lane." They treated her like furniture, like an unpaid servant, like something they owned rather than someone they were supposed to love. Lily rose before dawn to prepare their meals. She cleared their plates after they had eaten their fill, allowed only the cold scraps that remained on the edges. She cleaned their lavish rooms, ironed their expensive clothes, served at their parties where Serena's friends would giggle behind manicured hands and whisper, "Who is that? The help. She thinks she belongs here?" And through it all, Lily remained silent, observant, unbreakable. She absorbed every slight, every whispered cruelty, every casual reminder that she was beneath them. But deep in her soul, the words her mother had whispered in that final moment repeated like a sacred incantation, "No matter what happens, you belong somewhere bigger than this moment." Those words became her secret armor, her hidden throne, the quiet rebellion no one else could see. While Victor skimmed money from accounts that were never truly his, while Meredith obsessed over maintaining their perfect family image, while Serena hosted lavish parties and ordered Lily to serve drinks and clear plates, the girl they treated as nothing was quietly keeping their fragile world from collapsing. Late at night, when the house slept in blissful ignorance, Lily would sit under a single flickering bulb with financial ledgers spread before her. She found discrepancies, large ones, deliberate ones. Victor's greed was growing bolder, riskier. 17,000 missing again, she would whisper to herself. Most people would have let it all burn. Lily picked up the pen and fixed it, line by line, entry by entry. She corrected the numbers, covered the gaps, protected the illusion, not out of loyalty to them, but because she understood that uncontrolled chaos would destroy everything, including the future she was patiently waiting for. They woke up the next morning, drank their coffee, and praised themselves for their own cleverness. Victor would lean back and say, "See, I handled that financial mess perfectly." Lily would turn away, hiding the smallest, knowing shift in her expression. He had no idea. The mistreatment never stopped. It only grew more cutting as the years passed. One evening, while ironing one of Meredith's expensive dresses for yet another society dinner, her aunt looked at her reflection in the mirror and said coldly, "You know, some girls are just born to serve. You're lucky we gave you a purpose in life." Lily smiled softly and replied, "Yes, ma'am." But inside she thought, "One day you will see me clearly, and it is going to hurt." Serena would snap at her constantly. "Why do you always look like you know something we don't? Stop staring like that. Just do your job." Victor drank more. Meredith obsessed harder over their flawless image. The cousin grew more venomous. And still Lily endured, fixing their mistakes at 3 a.m, working secret jobs, studying law and finance in stolen hours, all while they continued treating her like the lowest servant in their household. They raised her like a servant, not knowing she owned everything. And somewhere in the distance, forces they could not yet see were beginning to move. The first plain envelope arrived one quiet morning. No return address. Victor's face drained of color the moment he read the first line. "He's coming back," he whispered, voice trembling. Elias Voss. The reclusive billionaire grandfather who had cut ties with his own son years earlier and believed his entire bloodline had perished in that rainy crash, was returning to settle the estate matters. Not for family, for business. The tension in the house tightened like invisible chains. Victor panicked on phone calls. Meredith's perfect mask began to crack. Serena grew sharper, more irritable, taking her growing fear out on the one person she could still control, Lily. But Lily remained steady. She had spent years being treated like nothing. Now the moment she had been quietly preparing for was finally approaching. And when it arrived, nothing in that house would ever be the same again. They raised her like a servant, not knowing she owned everything. The days in the Voss estate did not pass gently. They dragged like chains across cold stone. Every sunrise brought the same ritual of quiet humiliation. Lily would rise in the pre-dawn darkness, her body moving on autopilot through the grand halls that should have been hers by birthright. The marble floors were icy beneath her bare feet as she prepared breakfast for the family that had spent years reminding her she was nothing more than an unwelcome guest. Victor would sit at the head of the table like a king on his throne, barely acknowledging her presence except to issue commands. "Make sure the coffee is hot this time," he would mutter without looking up from his papers. "Last week it was barely warm. We don't pay you to serve cold garbage." Lily would nod, voice steady and soft. "Yes, Uncle Victor." He hated when she called him that. It reminded him of the blood connection he preferred to ignore. "Just Victor," he would snap. "You're not family. You're the girl we were kind enough to take in. Don't forget your place." Meredith was no gentler. She inspected every plate, every folded napkin, every polished surface with the sharp eyes of someone who lived for control. "Is this how you fold the linens?" she would say, holding up a napkin with exaggerated disgust. "It looks like it was done by a child." "Oh, wait, it was. Fix it, and do it properly this time. We have guests coming tonight, and I will not have you embarrassing us in front of people who actually matter." Serena, growing more entitled with every passing year, took particular pleasure in the power she held over her cousin. During one lavish weekend party, she tossed an expensive dress onto the floor at Lily's feet. "Iron this, and make it perfect. If there's even one crease, you'll be the one explaining to my friends why the help can't do a simple task." Lily picked up the dress without complaint. Later that night, as she moved silently among the glittering guests serving drinks and clearing plates, she overheard Serena's friends laughing. "Who is that girl in the corner? The one who never speaks?" Serena's voice carried clearly across the room, laced with venom and amusement. "Oh, her? She's nobody. Just the orphan we keep around to do the chores. We felt sorry for her after the accident, so we let her stay. But really, she's just the help. Don't mind her." The words cut deep, as they always did. Yet Lily's face remained a mask of perfect composure. She continued serving, her hands steady, her steps silent. Inside, however, her mother's voice echoed like a lifeline in the storm. "No matter what happens, you belong somewhere bigger than this moment." That promise was the only thing that kept the fire in her chest from consuming her entirely. As the years stretched on, the mistreatment evolved from casual cruelty to something colder, more calculated. Victor's financial troubles grew worse, yet he refused to admit it. He skimmed larger amounts from accounts that were never his to touch. Late at night, when the house slept, Lily would discover the discrepancies, thousands missing, transfers hidden, risks mounting. One particularly dangerous evening, she sat under the single flickering bulb in the servants' corridor, staring at the latest ledger. The numbers were worse than ever. Large withdrawals. Hidden transfers. Accounts that should never have been touched. This wasn't simple greed anymore. This was reckless endangerment that could bring the entire estate crashing down. Lily's fingers tightened around the page. "If this gets flagged," she whispered into the silence. For the first time, the choice felt heavy. She could let it collapse. Let Victor finally face the consequences of his own actions. Let the family that had treated her like dirt for 17 years taste the bitterness they so richly deserved. Or she could fix it again. Her jaw tightened. Not for them. Never for them. But because she refused to let chaos destroy the future she was quietly building. She reached for her own small savings, money earned from secret part-time jobs no one knew about, and transferred what was needed. She corrected the entries with painstaking precision, covered the gaps, and closed the breach. When she finally leaned back, a quiet breath escaped her chest. This time, they owed her more than they would ever understand. The next morning, Victor slammed the file shut at the breakfast table. "That's impossible," he muttered, frowning at the reports. Meredith looked up. What is it now? There was a major discrepancy last night, a huge one, and now it's gone, completely corrected. The numbers are cleaner than anything I would have done. Meredith waved it off dismissively. Clearly you handled it. Stop worrying. But Victor didn't look convinced. His eyes shifted slowly toward the doorway where Lily stood quietly, holding a tray of fresh coffee. Still, silent, invisible. He stared for a second too long, then looked away, shaking his head. No, impossible. Dinner that evening was quieter than usual. The air felt thick with unspoken tension. Serena pushed her food around her plate, irritated. Why does everything feel weird in this house lately? She complained. It's like the atmosphere changed. Meredith forced a smile. You're imagining things, darling. Everything is fine. But it wasn't fine. The balance was shifting, even if they couldn't yet name it. And for the first time, they could feel the ground beneath their feet becoming unsteady. Lily moved through the house like a shadow, unnoticed yet ever present. She walked past Victor's office one afternoon, the door slightly ajar. His voice slipped through the crack, sharp, panicked, laced with fear. I don't care what it takes, he hissed into the phone. If those records get reviewed, we're finished. It's not just mismanagement anymore. There are connections tied to those accounts. If anyone higher up starts looking. The line went dead. Silence. Lily paused in the hallway, listening. This wasn't simple greed anymore. This was exposure, and exposure always led to something bigger. The very next morning, the first mysterious letter arrived. It was a plain envelope, no return address, placed quietly among the rest of the mail. Meredith picked it up, frowning. What is this? Victor glanced at it and froze. Recognition. Fear. He snatched it from her hands with unsteady fingers. When he read the first line, his face lost all color. He's coming back, he whispered, voice barely audible. Who? Meredith asked, her own composure cracking. Victor swallowed hard. Elias. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Heavy. Unavoidable. Elias Voss. The cold, calculating billionaire grandfather who had severed ties with his son years earlier. He believed his entire bloodline had perished in that rainy highway crash. Now he was returning, not for a warm family reunion, but to settle ancient estate matters with the precision of a surgeon. Victor paced the room, composure unraveling. I was told they were all dead. The reports confirmed it. The crash, the identification, everything. Why now? Why after all these years? Meredith's eyes hardened. Because something changed. Does he know about her? Victor stopped pacing. I don't know. In the background, without a single visible reaction, Lily Voss understood everything. The world she had been quietly preparing for, through every insult, every late night, every hidden correction, was no longer distant. It was coming straight to their door. And when Elias Voss finally arrived, nothing in that house would survive unchanged. The tension coiled tighter with every passing day. Staff moved faster. Meredith inspected everything 3 times, snapping at workers over the smallest imperfections. Fix that curtain, it looks cheap. We cannot afford to look anything less than perfect when he arrives. Victor locked himself in his office for hours, making frantic phone calls, whispering desperately. Serena became sharper, more volatile, her fear manifesting as cruelty directed at the one person she could still dominate. Don't just stand there, she snapped at Lily one afternoon while the girl was folding laundry. Do something useful for once. Lily met her gaze briefly, calm and steady. I already have. Serena frowned. What does that even mean? But Lily had already turned away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. That night, storm clouds gathered once more over the estate, not violent yet, but heavy, waiting. The house stood illuminated against the dark sky, perfect from the outside, fragile within. Inside her small room, Lily stood by the window, looking out at the horizon. Not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with quiet recognition. This wasn't just the end of their illusion. It was the beginning of her truth. And when Elias Voss walked through that door, he wouldn't just find deception, he would find her. The girl they had raised like a servant, the girl they had diminished, insulted, and used for 17 long years, not knowing she owned everything. The day Elias Voss arrived felt like the sky itself was holding its breath. No grand announcement, no fanfare, just quiet precision, the kind that makes empires tremble. The black car glided through the gates of the Voss estate without spectacle. The engine's low hum was the only sound breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the house like a shroud. Inside, the family was in full performance mode. Meredith adjusted her posture for the third time in under a minute, painting on her most polished smile. Her hands smoothed invisible wrinkles from her designer dress. "Remember," she hissed to Victor, "we are the picture of stability and gratitude. Do not crack, not even for a second." Victor stood near the entrance, hands clasped tightly behind his back, trying and failing to look composed. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the perfectly controlled temperature of the grand hall. Serena hovered nearby, her usual arrogance replaced by barely contained curiosity mixed with dread. And Lily stood further back, exactly where she had always been placed, in the shadows, out of the spotlight, the invisible servant. Yet something about her presence felt different now, quieter, steadier, as if the air itself bent slightly around her. The front doors opened. Elias Voss entered. Tall, silver-haired, eyes like ice-blue scalpels that could strip a room down to its barest truths in seconds. He did not rush, he did not greet with warmth. He simply walked in, and everything in the house seemed to adjust around him, as if the walls themselves recognized true power when it arrived. Victor stepped forward first, voice strained but overly welcoming. "Uncle Elias, welcome. It's been a very long time." Elias looked at him. Not warmly, not coldly, just evaluating, like a man appraising a faulty investment. "Yes," he replied, voice low and measured, carrying the weight of decades of absolute authority. "It has." Meredith glided forward with practiced grace. "We're truly honored to have you here. The estate has been maintained with the utmost care in your absence." Elias gave the slightest nod. Polite, distant. His gaze moved past them, sweeping across the opulent room, taking in every detail, every tension, every imbalance. And then it landed on her. "Lily!" For one long electric moment, nothing moved. Not the air, not the sound, just his sharp eyes resting on the young woman standing quietly at the edge of the scene. A presence that did not fit the story he had been told. She stood perfectly still, not shrinking, not stepping forward. Simply there, calm, composed, unbreakable. Something small but undeniable shifted in Elias's expression. A flicker. Not full recognition yet, but something close. A question stirring in the depths of those cold eyes. "Who is that?" he asked calmly, his voice cutting through the room like a blade wrapped in silk. Victor answered far too quickly, the words tumbling out. "She's just someone we took in after the accident. The help, really. Nothing to concern yourself with." Just someone. Lily did not react. Her face remained serene. But Elias did not look away. He studied her for several heartbeats longer than necessary. "Is that so?" he said quietly. It did not sound like a question. It sounded like a note being filed away for later examination. The house immediately shifted into full performance. Dinner preparations were hurried, staff repositioned, voices lowered, everything curated, everything controlled. except control was no longer entirely theirs. Later that evening, the long dining table gleamed under crystal chandeliers, polished silver, fine china, measured elegance in every detail, a performance of wealth and stability. Victor sat straighter than usual, too straight. Meredith's smile held, but only just, small cracks visible at the edges. Serena's fingers tapped nervously against her wineglass. Lily Voss sat at the head of the table, not because he was offered the seat, but because no one else could have taken it. Lily moved quietly between them, serving each course with flawless grace, pouring wine, clearing plates. Exactly as she always had. But tonight, every movement carried invisible weight, because the moment they had all been circling was finally here. Meredith began smoothly, her voice honeyed. "I must say, we've done our very best to maintain the estate in your absence. Everything has been handled with the greatest responsibility." Elias did not respond immediately. He cut a piece of his meal, took a slow bite, then spoke with calm finality. "I noticed. 2 simple words, neutral, yet they landed like a warning shot." Victor cleared his throat. "We've handled the accounts, the properties, everything responsibly, of course." "Yes," Elias interrupted softly. That single word felt heavier than any raised voice. "I reviewed the preliminary reports. There are inconsistencies." Silence crashed over the table. Sharp, immediate. Meredith's smile faltered for half a second. Victor forced a brittle laugh. "Inconsistencies. I'm sure that's just a minor oversight on my part." "Is it?" Elias asked, his voice never rising, yet commanding the entire room. Before Victor could reply, a servant entered quietly. "Sir, the legal team has arrived." Elias nodded once. "Send them in." And just like that, the performance ended. The room shifted from civilized dinner to something far more dangerous. The lawyers entered with quiet professionalism. No emotion, no hesitation, just purpose. Files were placed on the table like evidence in a trial. Victor's jaw tightened. "What is this?" Elias leaned back slightly. "Clarity." The lead lawyer opened the first file. "Upon review of the estate accounts, we discovered repeated unauthorized transfers over the past several years." Meredith's breath caught audibly. "Further analysis shows these transfers were concealed through internal adjustments," the lawyer continued. "Adjustments that were corrected?" The word corrected lingered in the air like smoke. Elias's gaze shifted. Slowly, deliberately, straight toward Lily, who stood quietly at the edge of the room. Still, composed, unmoving. Everyone followed his eyes. Serena frowned. "Why are you looking at her?" Victor's voice rose, cracking with panic. "This has nothing to do with, doesn't it?" Elias cut through the room like a blade, not loud, absolute. The lawyer continued without mercy. "These corrections prevented external detection. Without them, the accounts would have triggered a full investigation." Meredith's hand trembled against the table. Victor's confidence shattered in real time. Elias leaned forward, eyes never leaving Lily. "Who made those corrections?" No one answered, because no one knew. Except her. The room felt smaller now, heavier, the truth pressing in from every side. Elias stood slowly. He walked around the long table, each step measured and intentional, until he stood directly in front of Lily. She did not move, did not step back, did not lower her gaze. She simply met his eyes, calm, steady, certain. "You knew," he said quietly, "not a question, a conclusion." Lily held his gaze. A single breath passed. "Yes." One word, no fear, no hesitation, just truth. Behind them, Victor snapped, desperation flooding his voice. "What is this? Why are we even entertaining this nonsense from the help?" Elias did not even glance at him. Victor no longer mattered. The lawyer stepped forward again. "There is one more matter. Another file opened. Older documents, faded photographs, records that should have remained buried for decades. During our audit, we cross-referenced historical data related to the Voss family estate. Victor's face went deathly pale. Meredith whispered a broken, "No, but it was too late." "According to these records," the lawyer said carefully, "there was a surviving heir from the original line." Absolute silence. Serena shook her head slowly. "Wait, no, that's not possible. They said everyone died in the crash." "They said everyone died," the lawyer finished calmly. They were wrong. The room tilted emotionally. Everything they believed, everything they had built their lives upon, cracking in real time. Elias took the document from the lawyer. He looked at it. Then he looked at Lily. His voice, when it came, carried the weight of history and final judgment. "You were not raising a burden. The entire room held its breath. You were concealing my granddaughter." The words landed like thunder rolling across the hills. Victor staggered back a step. Meredith's wine glass slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the sound explosive in the stunned silence. Serena's voice broke. "Wait! No! That's not! She's not!" But no one was listening. Because the truth did not need permission. It did not ask to be believed. It simply existed. And in that single devastating moment, everything changed. Lily stood exactly where she had always stood, same position, same quiet posture, but now the entire room had shifted around her. She looked at each of them in turn, Victor, Meredith, Serena, one by one, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something far more devastating. Clarity. And then she spoke, softly, calmly, unshakably. "I did not change. A single breath. You simply never had the clarity to see me." Silence. Heavy. Final. Because there was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to deny. Nothing left to hide. The illusion they had built for 17 years had ended. In its place stood the truth. Unmoved. Unbroken. Unquestionable. Silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it is what remains after everything has been destroyed. The shattered wine glass still lay scattered across the cold marble floor, glittering like tiny accusations under the chandelier light. No one moved to clean it. No one even looked at it. Because every eye in the room was fixed on Lily Voss. The girl they had spent 17 years diminishing. The girl they had ordered around like cheap help. The girl they had fed scraps and reminded daily that she was lucky to even have a roof. Now stood revealed as the rightful heir to the entire Voss empire. Victor's face had drained of all color. The smug confidence that once defined him had vanished, replaced by raw, naked fear. He staggered back another step, voice cracking as he tried desperately to regain control. "This is ridiculous," he burst out far too loudly, the sound desperate and brittle. "There has to be some mistake. You're basing this on outdated records, old assumptions. Enough." Elias Voss did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The single word landed with more force than any shout ever could. Victor froze instantly, mouth still open, the protest dying in his throat. Because deep down, he already knew. This was no misunderstanding. This was complete, irreversible exposure. Meredith's carefully constructed composure had abandoned her entirely. Her hands shook as she clutched the edge of the table. "But we raised her," she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to control it. "We took her in after the accident. We gave her a home. We gave her purpose." Lily's gaze shifted slowly to her aunt. Not harsh, not emotional, just clear, piercing. And for reasons Meredith could not explain, the words died in her throat. Because, for the first time, her own excuses sounded exactly like what they were. Hollow justifications for years of cruelty. "This doesn't make sense," Meredith continued weakly, shaking her head. She's been here her whole life. She's always been the help. She stopped mid-sentence. The word help now felt dangerous, wrong, poisonous. Because suddenly, it wasn't Lily who looked small. It was them. Victor tried again, desperation creeping into every syllable. For years, this family operated under a false assumption that we were in control. But control, without understanding, Elias glanced briefly toward Lily, is nothing more than illusion. Victor swallowed hard. Every word from Elias felt like it was peeling away another layer of the lies they had built their lives upon. Layer by layer, lie by lie, until there was nothing left to hide behind. Lily stepped forward slowly. Not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate. And that simple movement shifted the entire room once more. She was no longer in the background. She was stepping into her rightful place. Victor stared at her, eyes wide with a mixture of confusion, fear, and disbelief. "You knew?" he asked, his voice cracking. "All this time, you knew?" Lily met his gaze steadily. "Yes. No explanation, no justification, just truth." Meredith stepped forward suddenly, her voice rising with frantic energy. "Then why didn't you say anything? Why stay silent? Why let this continue for so long?" A pause. For the first time, something new flickered across Lily's expression. Not anger, not bitterness, something deeper, understanding. "I was not responsible for your choices," she said calmly. "I was responsible for mine." The words settled into the room like heavy stones dropped into still water. They carried something undeniable, accountability, something none of the Voss family had ever truly practiced. Victor's desperation reached its peak. "We gave you everything. You had a place here, food, shelter, a roof over your head." "You had control," Lily corrected gently. "Not aggressively, not emotionally, just accurately. And you used it." Victor's voice faltered completely. There was no argument left. No defense that didn't collapse under the weight of truth. Serena sat frozen in her chair, unable to meet Lily's eyes anymore. The cousin who had spent years mocking her, ordering her around, treating her like dirt, now looked smaller than she ever had. Meredith sank slowly into her chair, the perfect social mask she had worn for decades fracturing beyond repair. "So what now?" she asked quietly, voice loaded with fear. "You just take everything?" Lily looked at her, not unkindly, but not with any familiarity either. "No," she said softly. "I don't take anything." Another breath. "I simply stop giving what was never yours." The silence that followed was absolute, because in that moment the truth sank in fully for all of them. Everything they had relied on. The stability, the corrections, the invisible protection that had kept their fragile world from collapsing night after night had never come from them. It had come from her. And now, that protection was gone. Elias observed everything quietly from his position at the head of the table. He did not interrupt. He did not guide. He did not soften the moment, because this was necessary. Truth did not need assistance. It only needed space. And Lily was filling that space effortlessly. In the days that followed, the house of cards they had built upon deception began its elegant, inevitable collapse. Victor's financial deceptions were laid bare under the cold light of a full audit. Every skimmed dollar, every hidden transfer, every risky move, all exposed. Meredith's carefully curated social circle dissolved into whispers of scandal and betrayal. Serena watched in stunned silence as the girl she had tormented for years stepped into the legacy that had always been hers. Lily did not gloat. She did not need to. She moved through the grand halls with the same quiet discipline she had honed in darkness for so long. The empire simply recognized its true mistress and bent to her will as though it had been waiting for this moment all along. Documents were signed, structures were corrected, accounts were stabilized, not as punishment, not as revenge, just restoration. The estate did not collapse in chaos. It reorganized itself with precision, aligning finally with what it was always meant to be. And those who had clung so desperately to control were gently but firmly removed from it. Not destroyed, not publicly humiliated, just separated from what they could no longer maintain. Victor stood alone in the hallway one afternoon, looking older than his years. Not physically, but visibly, as if time had finally caught up with him all at once. "I never thought it would end like this," he said quietly when Lily passed by. Lily met his eyes. "It didn't end," she replied. It corrected itself. That word again, corrected, but this time it did not belong to ledgers or accounts, it belonged to truth. Meredith sat alone in the dining room later that same day. The same long table, the same crystal glasses, the same perfection. But it all looked meaningless now, like a stage set after the final curtain had fallen. "I suppose we never really knew you," she said softly when Lily entered the room. Lily did not deny it. She did not soften it. "You knew what was convenient," she answered. "That was enough for you." No argument followed, because there wasn't one left. Serena avoided her entirely now, unable to face the girl she had once reduced to the help. Rain began again one evening, not violent, not tragic, just present, like memory, like release. Lily stood on the balcony of the estate that had waited for her all along. The same balcony where she had once stood as a shadow. Now she stood as its living embodiment. She closed her eyes and whispered the words her mother had given her in that final moment. No longer as a desperate survival mantra, but as truth made flesh. No matter what happens, you belong somewhere bigger than this moment. This time, she understood it completely. The girl they had raised like a servant, the girl they had diminished, insulted, used, and overlooked for 17 long years, had become the one person they could never live without. She simply was. And that was enough. Part 5. In the grand theatre of life, some stories end with thunderous applause and dramatic revenge. But Lily Voss's story ended differently. It ended in quiet, elegant correction. The days after the revelation unfolded like a slow, inevitable tide, washing away years of illusion while revealing what had always been true beneath the surface. Victor no longer paced the halls barking orders. He moved like a man who had suddenly become a stranger in his own home. One afternoon he stood by the large window in the study, staring out at the grounds he had once believed were his to control. "I never thought it would end like this," he said again when Lily passed by, his voice hollow. Lily paused. She looked at the man who had spent 17 years reminding her she was lucky to even eat the scraps from his table. "It didn't end," she replied softly. "It simply corrected itself. The numbers always do in the end." Victor had no reply. The entitled uncle who once skimmed fortunes now understood the true cost of every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every time he had treated blood as burden. Meredith fared no better. She sat for hours in the once vibrant dining room, surrounded by the same crystal and silver that had defined her perfect image. But the perfection felt hollow now, a beautiful mask cracked beyond repair. When Lily entered to review estate documents, Meredith looked up with tired eyes. "We thought we were doing the right thing," she whispered, almost pleading. "We gave you shelter. We raised you when no one else would." Lily regarded her aunt with that sane, steady, devastating clarity. "You gave me control over your mistakes," she said gently. "You used me to maintain the illusion you needed. That was never kindness. That was convenience." Meredith had no defense left. The woman who had once cropped Lily out of every family portrait now saw the girl she had tried to erase standing at the center of the frame. Serena was the quietest of all. The cousin who had giggled with her friends while ordering Lily to serve drinks, who had mocked her for thinking she belonged, now avoided eye contact entirely. One evening she found Lily reviewing documents in the main study, the same room where Serena had once thrown parties and treated her like hired help. I didn't know," Serena said finally, voice small. Lily looked up from the papers. "You didn't want to know?" That simple truth hung between them. Serena opened her mouth, then closed it again. There were no clever retorts left, no casual cruelty. Only the heavy realization that the girl she had spent years diminishing had been carrying the weight of their entire world on her shoulders the whole time. Through it all, Lily Voss watched from a distance, not interfering, not guiding, simply observing with the sharp eyes of a man who had built empires. One quiet evening on the same balcony where Lily now stood freely, he spoke to her. "You didn't ask for any of this," he said. Lily turned slightly, the evening breeze moving through her hair. "I didn't need to ask." Elias studied her for a long moment. "You could step away, live differently, outside of all this weight." Lily looked out over the estate that had once felt like a prison and now felt like home. "I already lived outside of belonging once," she said steadily. "I don't intend to live there again." Elias gave the smallest nod of understanding. In decades of dealing with powerful men and fragile egos, he had rarely encountered someone with such quiet, unshakable strength. Documents were signed over the following weeks, structures corrected, accounts stabilized with surgical precision. The estate did not burn in dramatic revenge. It realigned itself, quietly, efficiently, inevitably, with its true heir. Victor, Meredith and Serena were gently removed from positions of control. They were not cast out into poverty. Lily ensured they had enough to live comfortably. But the power, the decisions, the legacy, those were no longer theirs. They had raised her like a servant. Now they lived in the shadow of the empire she quietly commanded. And through every step of this transformation, Lily remained unchanged in the ways that mattered most. She did not gloat, she did not seek revenge, she did not raise her voice. She simply stopped giving what had never been theirs to begin with. One final evening, as gentle rain began to fall once more over the estate, Lily stood alone on the wide balcony. The same rain that had once stolen her parents now fell like a soft benediction, washing away the long years of shadow. She closed her eyes and let the words that had carried her through every cruelty rise to her lips one last time, not as a desperate prayer, not as survival, but as truth made flesh, as destiny finally catching up. No matter what happens, you belong somewhere bigger than this moment. This time, the words felt complete, whole, real. The girl who had once been treated as invisible furniture in her own home now stood as the living embodiment of the legacy built on blood and ambition. The empire of stone and steel had finally recognized its true mistress. They had spent 17 years trying to keep her small. In the end, she had been everything they unknowingly depended upon. And so the story of Lily Voss was never merely about hidden wealth or sudden fortune. It was the story of a soul that refused to vanish into the shadows, of quiet endurance that outlasted cruelty and entitlement, of a single promise kept across the years until the moment of reckoning arrived, unstoppable and true. The next time you see someone being diminished in their own home, treated like furniture in a world that should have been theirs, remember Lily Voss. Remember the uncle who called her a burden. Remember the aunt who demanded perfection while erasing her from every photo. Remember the cousin who laughed and said she was just the help. And ask yourself in the silence of your own heart, would you have seen her, or would you have looked away, blind to the quiet power waiting to rise? Because sometimes the greatest inheritance is not fortune, not gold, not power. It is the unyielding knowledge that no matter how small the world tries to make you, you belong somewhere bigger, and that knowledge, once truly believed, cannot be taken away, even by those who raised you like a servant. They raised her like a servant, not knowing she owned everything. This is Veiled Flame. Follow for more stories where the quiet ones win.